Again, welcome on behalf of Real Talk. I want to introduce our panelists. Our first is Dr. Brent Burt. Both of these, yes? Both of these gentlemen have their doctoral degrees. Dr. Brent Burt has a master's degree from the University of Kentucky in Systems and Ecology, a PhD from the University of Arizona in Education and Environmental Biology, and he is a professor here at SFA. And also we have Dr. Charles Jackson. He has 2 master's degrees, one in science education and in environmental biology from George Mason University. He has his doctorate in science education from the University of Virginia, and he is also a lifetime member of Mensa. And so, having said that, let's move right on. The parameters for the debate is each person will have 20 minutes to introduce their take on the issue of biodiversity. That's what we're talking about tonight. The issue that we're talking about is biodiversity. There will be 10-minute rebuttals after the 20-minute intro, and then we will open, no, we're cutting the rebuttals, and then we're getting right into the question and answer. So the 20-minute times, and I will be keeping right now.
All right, well, I want to thank Real Time for organizing. Real Talk for.
Can you grab your microphone, please?
Is it on? There we go. Does that work?
We can hear you fine.
Yeah. Believe me, I can talk. No, I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. I think we should have a very interesting debate. I've been looking forward to it all week. I love talking about evolution. I've been teaching this for 15 years. And the first thing I want to do is let's really talk about what is evolution. And evolution, Darwin defined it as descent with modification. And interesting, in his book on the origin of species, he only uses the term evolution one time. He describes descent with modification. And that means organisms live from generation to generation, and ancestors give rise to descendants. But the descendants are not exactly like the ancestral stock, but there's change through time. That's all evolution is. And here's my simple kind of cartoon version of what microevolution is. It's basically one scale of evolution where you see changes from generation to generation in the gene pool that can have modifications, relatively minor modifications typically, of phenotypes like in this case. Wow, the rabbits have evolved since I did this. On my computer, some of them are evolving to brown rabbits. But apparently the environment has changed and they've gone back to their white colors. Okay, but over the long term, evolution above the species level, or long-term accumulation of microevolutionary processes, we call that macroevolution. And it's a continuum, but we talk about it as if it's a dichotomy, but realize it's a continuum. And what the topic of macroevolution is really what we're talking about today. How does biological diversification occur? How do we describe the tree of life? How do we discover the pattern of the tree of life? And how do we understand the processes that have led to this branching structure? So, with that basic understanding of the broad class what evolution is, let's talk about, is there evidence for evolution? You can actually see evolution in your own lifetime. In a historical time frame, we can document evolution. HIV evolution. HIV is a tough subject. That virus has a record high mutation rate. That means it has a lot of genetic variation, meaning that it can quickly adapt to any drugs that we try to use to treat patients with. So that's a severe problem. But using an evolutionary approach, we've learned how to make more efficient treatments. And in the same line, bacteria tend to evolve resistance to our drugs when they're not used correctly. But using an evolutionary insight, we've learned to come up with more efficient treatments to make our drugs last longer and be more effective. Okay, you may be thinking, yeah, those are single-cell organisms and viruses. It's debatable whether they're living or not. What about real things? What about multicellular organisms? Well, this is a house sparrow. House sparrows do not belong in North America. They were actually introduced from England in the 1850s. And my advisor at the University of Kansas actually did a very famous study where he documented that different populations of house sparrows today that started off in a small population that we know their origin in England, and they had very limited variation as far as their color, their shape, their size. They've spread throughout North America, they've spread throughout Central and South America, and as they've encountered different environmental ecological challenges, they've adapted to that. As mutations pop up in their population, that's given natural selection something to tinker with so that they're better adapted to face those ecological challenges. So we know what the initial variation was, and we now see that sparrows up in Canada, much chunkier, relatively shorter appendages, and that's adapted for colder climates. You don't see that in Tucson. Okay? In Tucson, you get the little skinny birds because that's better for shedding heat. So that's a demonstration of the power of natural selection in a relatively short time period. Well, we've basically done evolution to various other organisms. You know, from the field of agriculture, we've taken some lineages and said, well, we want to make them better milk producers. So we've got Jerseys and Holsteins. Other lineages, we produce them to be good beef cattle. This is really analogous to what natural selection is doing. We call it artificial selection because instead of nature being the filter, and that's what natural selection does, it filters out the traits that are not a good fit to the current environment, and it passes on those traits in higher frequency to future generations so that they do adapt. In artificial selection, we're the filter. You know, if you like, dogs like this little poodle there, not me personally, but I mean, if you like that kind of thing, man, look at what we've done. We've taken a wolf ancestry and we've created all these different breeds, just showing you the power of selection, in this case artificial selection, but it's analogous to what happens in nature. One of the biggest tools that we have to understanding patterns in macroevolution come from the study of homologies. Homologies are traits that are similar between organisms due to a shared common ancestry. Okay. Here's a classic example of how homologies make sense from an evolutionary point of view. These are what we call, the fancy term is this, the pentadactylous limb of tetrapods, basically meaning just limbs of vertebrates here. We got the wing of a bat, the flipper of a porpoise, the horse leg, a mole leg, a human hand that can be used for turning off cell phones.
That's right.
So these structures, they have very different functions. Why do they have the same basic building blocks? I mean, they've all got a humerus, an ulnar, radius, carpals, metacarpals, phalanges. Obviously, they're very different shapes. They've inherited the same genes for building these bones, but they have variation in their developmental genes that have caused them to evolve different shapes to fit the purpose for that species. And the ultimate homology is found in the DNA. It's the genetic level that's really informing us about macroevolutionary patterns today. As a matter of fact, this is called part of the universal genetic code. It's really one of our best lines of evidence that life is monophyletic, that comes from a single origin that has been changing through time. All organisms, living organisms, have DNA, and getting the information out of DNA to make proteins that make our morphologies and behaviors, they work through the same rules. Okay, this is one of my favorite examples, vestigial traits. Why does this piece, this is kiwi, ground kiwi, if you lift up its, it looks like fur, but it's feathers. If you lift up the feathers right there, there's a little bitty wing. I mean, if you go to Chili's and you order a plate of kiwi wings, you're going to be sadly disappointed. Tiny little vestigial features. They're not functional. That's what a vestigial trait is. It's a non-functional trait. Or a trait that has minimal function. It's basically winking out. Okay? Why do they have it? Well, they come from a flighted ancestral lineage. Same thing why certain snakes have remnants of pelvic girdles. Well, they've evolved from the lineage of reptiles that have functional legs. We have vestigial appendages. The remnants of our tailbone. Okay? Minimal function at best. I mean, the arguments for functionality there are quite true. Okay, right here. This is the erector pili muscle. We all know what happens when we get really cold or sudden fright. Okay, you get goosebumps. Goosebumps are a function of this muscle contracting at the base of a hair follicle to create that hair to stand up. Doesn't do anything for me. But for the chimpanzee here, it's a way of establishing a dominancy. Okay? In animals that live in cold climates, they fluff up their pelage to increase the thermal capabilities of their fur so that they don't lose heat screen. Okay? Well, we have this because we come from a mammal ancestry in which we had, our ancestors had a complete pelage. All right, let's move on to the fossil record. We have really a spectacular fossil record. And we have quite a few of what have been traditionally called missing link fossils. I prefer the term transitional fossils because it better speaks to really what they are. They inform us about some of the morphological changes between major groups of animals that we see today. I don't like the term missing link because here they are. I mean, unless you lose one, then it's a missing link again. But we found them, right? Okay, so we're really turning at some amazing transitional fossils in China right now that are informing us about which group of dinosaurs birds are most closely related to. I mean, there's so many of these now that taxonomists are starting to get confused about where do we draw the line between a non-bird and a bird. I mean, it's that close. Here we have a very famous fossil, Tiktaalik, which shows the progression of features from an amphibian to an amphibian ancestry from a lobe-finned fish. Here's a good example of some transitional fossils that show morphological changes in mammals that gave rise to cetaceans, mammals, aquatic mammals, which, by the way, also have a vestigial right here. I don't see this thing lumbering around in this pelvic girdle very much, but it's got it, right? Okay, well, let's talk about us for a minute. Let's talk about where we fit into the tree of life. We are great apes, okay? And this is some of the evidence that we do belong to this tree. This is what we call karyotypes. It's basically visualization of our DNA, all of our chromosomes. And the chromosomes are numbered here. We have remarkable similarity in our DNA with all of the great apes, but here's a big change right here. We have one chromosome where they have two, but if you look at the genes that are found on each of these, they're the same genes, same gene loci. And so what's happened is our ancestor that split off from the remaining great apes simply had a fusion in this chromosome. Well, is there any more evidence of that besides the fact that it's the same genes there? Well, at the end of chromosomes, there are regions called telomeres. There's a telomere right in the center of that chromosome. Telomeres, tela means end. You're not supposed to be in the middle. And the reason it's in the middle is because two ends fuse together. That's great evidence of our linkage to this group. But which of them are we most closely related to? Here is a copy of some DNA repeats, and repeats occur when there's misalignments in chromosomes during meiosis. And you see that what that does is it makes extra regions of DNA. Well, we actually share some of this misalignment. We share some of these copies with both copies are found in humans, bonobos, and chimps. Both are species of chimps, but only one copy is in the other great apes. Chimps are our closest relatives, and there's other evidence that chimps are our closest relatives. And I'm sorry, I know that upset some of you, but I mean, if I had to pick an answer, a group, and again, we didn't come from chimps. We share a common ancestor. We share our most recent common ancestor of living organisms with chimps. And if I had to pick a sister taxon, I kind of like chimps. I think they're pretty cool. So, let me just end by talking about the significance of evolution. Evolution is one of the most important concepts that has ever occurred in science. It led to what we call a paradigm shift. It completely changed the way we think about biological diversification and biology in general. It's been compared to how Newton influenced physics with applying mathematics to nature. And Copernicus's heliocentrism, how the sun is really the center of our solar system, not the Earth, that obviously is going to completely change astronomy, right? I mean, that's what we call a paradigm. And, I mean, I've just shown you some textbook examples. I mean, literally, I got them from textbooks. That's what we call textbook examples. But, I mean, there is an immense amount of data that support the scientific principle of evolution. And evolution is really the unifying principle of biology. Famous quote by Theodosis Dobzhansky, Mendelian geneticist: "Nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution." And what he means by that is if you're a scientist, you want to truly understand something about biology, why it's the way it is today, you have to understand how it got there. And you can't do that without thinking about evolution. Okay. Now there are other ways of thinking about biological diversification. Creationists, proponents of intelligent design, believe that a creator was involved in the process. And you know what? That's a theological principle. I don't know. Absolutely could be the case. Absolutely could be the case. As a scientist, I can't say one way or the other. I can't prove it. I can't disprove it. It's outside the realm of science. Science cannot deal. It can only collect data in nature. Once you throw in something that's supernatural, you know, that's somebody else. That's philosophy. That's theology. It's not my game. So, if you come away with anything from today, I want you to think comparing ideas that are based on belief systems, faith systems, and science, which is restricted to interpretation of facts. Apples and oranges. You know, you're talking about two different classes of explanations. And most people can reconcile the two. The only time you can't reconcile the two is if you have a strict interpretation, a word-for-word interpretation of some religious text. Then you run into some problems. But most people reach a compromise. And for that very reason, most creationists are not supported by most religious denominations. Here's just a list of some of the groups that have specifically come out and said, hey, we're good with evolution. We want good science, and evolution is good science. And one of the things I would like to point you to is a webpage called the Clergy Letter Project. And it's basically an effort to get clergy to communicate with their followers. Look, we want good science, right? We want the United States to lead in the world in science. We need to encourage good science and to make sure that we have an understanding of science and that and they are stating that it is not in conflict with their beliefs. And I'm actually a scientific advisor for this project. Definitely check it out. They're really trying to do good. Okay, thank you very much.
Well, facts are what science must be driven upon, not beliefs, not opinions, not fill-in-the-blank things that are supposedly bridging the gap between observation and theory. Observation is king. Facts, logic, evidence, data must be the driving force behind scientific, not opinion, but scientific theories and anything that's codified as law. Yeah, we're talking about diversity, biological diversity. Of course, the creationist perspective and the creation model versus the evolution model is that diversity has been here from the beginning. And much diversity has occurred since then, but not the kind of diversity that has a phylogenetic tree going from a single common ancestor for all life. There is where the two models are quite different, although they're very similar in many other ways. Viruses have been mutating, and they mutated 1,000,000 times faster than human DNA does. But of course, after 3 billion years of supposed time, whereas humans have only had 2 million, maybe 7 million of supposed time, what are viruses? They haven't variated anything but viruses, and that's just a kickoff. Okay, Now, I'm going to be referencing a college-level biology textbook, Sylvia Mader's Inquiry into Life, 11th edition. I taught biology in college out of the 7th edition, and the college where I teach now, where I'm teaching online classes. In online, they don't use Sylvia Mader, but on the campus, they're using the 13th edition. So I'm very familiar with Mader. And and what I want to do, okay, it's not doing that. Let's go down to previous. Can you previous me? All right, never mind. There you go. There's a page number here, just to show you where it comes. The idea that allele frequencies changing in moths is evolution, end quote. So here you go. Now, how many people have ever seen this picture in textbook? Okay, very, very common illustration of variation in peppered moths, Biston betullaria, according to Kettlewell's studies, following the industrial melanism, it's called, where the tree barks were clean and white and had lichens on them, which camouflaged the white moths, and the black ones looked like, it's like hanging out a little lunch sign for dinner and lunch for the birds. Whereas the blackened trees, after industrialism, blackened the barks with air pollution, then the black moths were camouflaged. And look what it says here. Since a change in allele frequencies is our definition of evolution, then evolution has occurred. It's a college-level book. Now, what do they mean by that? An allele is a different form of a gene. Frequency just means how often it pops up. Well, you can see that the black moth gene doesn't pop up in the population very much in this situation here, because they're not the fittest in this situation. Survival of the fittest is true. We can see that. Natural selection is true. We can see that. But here, you've got more white moths because they have an advantage. Now, after it changes, the black moths have an advantage, and there are fewer white moths. It says here, any change in allele frequencies in the gene pool of a population signifies evolution has occurred. Now look, think, and watch. On this side, we've got black moths and white moths, okay? And after evolution has done its work, what they're calling evolution, we have black moths and white moths. Okay, now, did this require any new DNA? Did it require new genes or new alleles?
No.
Did it require new genetic information or new traits?
No.
Okay, now, this, you can call this evolution, and if you do, I'll believe. I'll go with it. That, I can see this. But this process, can this process of just changing how often a pre-existing gene that's always been there appears, can that get you from worms to eagles? See, no. Worms don't have feather genes, beak genes, talon genes, wing genes. You see, evolution demands that new genes with new DNA, with new coding for new traits and new genetic information must arise. Now, maybe that can happen, but natural selection can't do it. But what's another word for select? Choose, or pick from what is already there. And of course, that's what was happening. The situation made the darker colors moths more fit, so now there were more of them. But nothing new. Natural selection cannot create anything. It can only conserve or select who stays and who does not. It depends on your definition of evolution, whether the peppered moths is really an example of evolution or not. If it's just gene frequencies, then I believe in evolution. But if it's writing new genetic material so that bacteria can become human beings, I can't go for evolution because I don't see observations, data, facts, or logic to go with it. Can this turn worms into eagles? Not this process. You believe in evolution if you want, but not because of industrial melanism. Okay. Now, the guy who wrote the foreword to the 1971 edition of Darwin's book said right here about this, these experiments beautifully demonstrate natural selection or survival of the fittest in action, but they do not show evolution in progress. For however the populations may alter in their content, or light intermediate or dark forms, all the moths remain from beginning to end, peppered moths, Biston, and Betullaria. So, you can believe in evolution if you want, but not because of this, which is in a section of the book called Evidences for Evolution. Something else. In 1905, they knew there was this kind of problem with natural selection, and it isn't a magic wand. It can't create anything. Natural selection may explain survival of the fittest. Yeah, how the fit survive. but it cannot explain the arrival of the fittest. In other words, how do we get moths in the first place? Where did they come from? From bacteria? If that's the theory, fine, but does the data have anything to support that? Certainly not in this case. In 2004, in November, National Geographic had a special issue called, Was Darwin Wrong? And they mentioned all kinds of different proofs. Of course, National Geographic would say, no, Darwin was not wrong. The evidence is overwhelming. Well, I don't have time to go through all the 15 evidences they had in 2004 there, and every once in a while, you have your periodicals that feel that they are compelled to have a special issue talking all about how Darwin is right, is right, is right. Don't doubt Darwin. Now, in here, there's a few things I do want to mention. They mention as the very most important thing, they mention bacteria evolving resistance to modern antibiotic drugs. And that's why I want to pick that one. On this page here, right here, is where they talk about it. Well, let's take a look at what they have to say about this most important source of variation indicating that evolution is true. It says here, the capacity for quick change among disease-causing microbes is what makes them so dangerous to large numbers of people and so difficult and expensive to treat. So far, that's testable and provable. They leak from wildlife or domestic animals into humans. How many have heard bird flu? Swine flu? Yeah, they leak from. So far, we know that's true. Now, adapting to new circumstances as they go. There's some genetic changes that are capable of happening without writing new genetic information, without making new genes with new traits. You can have genetic drift. That's also not a necessary part of an evolutionary world. It can happen without evolution being true. And we see it happening. They leak from wildlife or domestic animals into humans, adapting to new circumstances as they go. Their inherent variability, and they are very variable, and they can genetic drift a lot. They can have all these different combinations of genes. Yeah, that's true. Allows them to find new ways. Now we're getting a little funny. Bacteria don't actually sit around and think about it, Look, the humans have invented a new antibiotic. Quick, watch it all. And they do that Iron Man thing, activate. That's not what they do. Now, this is what the textbooks and many people will lead you to believe. No documented case of shielding. I'll show you what really happens, but let's go on. It says here, they find new ways of evading and defeating the human immune system. By natural selection, they acquire resistance. Okay, now I'm going to show you that doesn't happen. They can't acquire anything. Remember, natural selection picks from what's already there. Maybe to get it from another germ, but it's not a new invention. Watch, I'll show you. I'll prove you what I'm trying to say here. By natural selection, they acquire resistance to drugs that should kill them. They evolve. Now here's the leap of faith. This is faith. In this situation, it's a completely faith-based statement. Watch, I'm going to show you. There's no better or more immediate evidence supporting the Darwinian theory than this process of forced transformation among our communicable germs. I chose this because National Geographic said it's the best. Now, do germs evolve? No, bacteria really can't evolve resistance to antibiotics. Here's what happens. Somebody in the crowd is already immune, already dark-colored, like the dark-colored moth. And then natural selection weeds out everybody else. How many people, anybody here immune to poison ivy? Poison ivy. Okay, a few of you. What if the world was covered with poison ivy? We had sort of an inconvenient vine thing going. And all of us ivy allergics itch to death because of the poison in the oils on the surface of those leaves. A toxin that would get us. But you ivy-resistant ones would be the ones left to repopulate the world just like Adam and Eve. And all of your kids are going to be immune because they're going to get that from your genetic makeup. Now, what an evolutionist might say is, look, a new race of humans has evolved with superior genetics. No, they were always there to begin with. New genes, new DNA, new information, new genetic material, new traits. It's what?
Still natural.
Please allow him to speak.
Absolutely, it's natural selection. The very point, they are selected to survive, and then they multiply. If you got 1 million germs coursing through your veins, and just one of them can survive an onslaught of antibiotic, that little bugger is going to multiply, and in 8 hours there'll be 1 million more. And they'll all look like mama, and they'll all have immunity. It's completely selection. Nothing to do with creating any new information. So they'll survive most of it. There's one other way, there's two other ways that germs can become, or seem to become, immune to new antibiotic drugs. Plasmid transfer. Bacteria have little Cheerio-shaped chromosomes called plasmids, and they're cranking out copies of these all the time, and they trade them like baseball cards with each other. And they can do this across species, interspecies plasmid transfer. So if just one germ on the earth has the immunity gene to our new antibiotic drug, you can give it to everybody else, every other germ, every other bacteria on the earth. So plasmid transfer can spread the immunity across species lines. Also, mutation. Many antibiotics target either a transmembrane protein on the surface of the bacterial membrane, or they will target a metabolite inside the chemistry of the bacteria. If the bacteria is a mutated, and shut down a gene that was making the transmembrane protein that was needed as a docking site, or shut down the gene that manufactured the metabolite that the antibiotic was counting on combining with and becoming a poison, then that little bacteria is immune because it lost a target feature. Now that's not upward movement in evolution, it's devolution, it's downward movement. Because if this is really evolution, then why don't bacteria just shut off all their genes and become Einstein? You see, that's not evolution, it's the loss of a target feature. Check grad class textbooks in microbiology. There's nothing but these three things that have ever been seen, observed, or actually suggested by immunologists and bacteriologists. These are the three ways. Never the Iron Man chilling. Look at what it says here in a book published in 2000, a college level book called Understanding Evolution, in the chapter on selection and action. Look at what it says here. It says mutations have occurred in bacterial populations that enable the mutant bacterial cells to survive in the presence of a drug. Here again we notice that mutations furnish the source of this evolutionary change, and that the fate of the mutant gene is governed by selection, picking, choosing. In a normal environment, mutations that confer resistance to a drug are rare or undetected. But in an environment changed by the addition of a drug, the drug-resistant mutants get favored and supplant the previous normal bacterial strains. It might be thought that the mutations conferring resistance are actually caused or induced by the drug. This is not the case. They're not trying to evolve. Drug-resistant mutations arise randomly in bacterial cells, irrespective of the presence or absence of the drug. An experiment devised by geneticist Joshua Lederberg proves evidence that the drug acts as a selecting agent, like the poison in antibiotics, like the poison on poison ivy leaves, like the dark color on the trees. Selection is happening, undoubtedly, observable, testable, provable. But is it evolution? Permitting pre-existing mutations to express themselves. Natural selection is not a magic wand that can create mutations. They're already there. It selects, it picks and chooses from what's there. So suggesting in the Inquiry into Life by Sylvia Mader that antibiotic selection is evolution is illogical and unsupported by clear thinking. It just isn't true. The logic, the data, the facts are that way. Now, it does say in the book, how many?
5.
Pesticides and antibiotics are selective agents for insects and bacteria, respectively. The forms that survive the exposure give rise to future generations that are resistant. The forms that survive. For this to happen, do you need new genes, new DNA, new genetic information, new traits? No, you don't. For this to happen, all it has to do is change the environment, and the survivors that already have the pre-existing resistance will be the lone survivors and a new race of just them. But it's an elimination of the others that were there among these that were also there to begin with. I think for the interest of time, I'll just go on. Okay, let's see that one too. Did the nylon-eating bacteria evolve to get that way? That's interesting, because that's often pointed out as an evidence that evolution, because nylon didn't exist, until very recently in the history of life on this planet. But how is nylon held together? What would you have to do to digest it? Just break peptide bonds, which is the bond that holds all proteins together. Bacteria have been digesting peptide bonds and proteins since there's been bacteria and proteins. Not a problem, not an indication of evolution. And again, this is just like the moths. Before you add the antibiotic, you've got red ones that are not resistant and blue ones that are. It's like the moths. Now, after you add the antibiotic to the environment, the blue ones survive a whole lot more. It's a shift in gene frequency, allele frequency, and the red ones are in the minority. Again, before evolution, you got red ones and blue ones. After evolution, you got red ones and blue ones. No new genes, no new genetic information, no upward climb. This process is not going to turn bacteria into birds. Is this evolution again? Depends on your definition of evolution. If you think evolution is selection, that's all it is, then I'll believe. But it's got to be more to get bacteria to turn into birds, which is what the evolution theory says happened in eventuality. Peter and Rosemary Grant did a 20-year study on the Galapagos Island of the Galapagos finches. Darwin's finches, they're sometimes called because of the time Darwin spent off the HMS Beagle on the Galapagos Islands. And it's in many, many different textbooks. Again, it's in this one as a change in allele frequency in birds being. Evidence, again, equating it with evolution. You see all the different shapes in the beaks. Heavy beaks for cracking seeds during times when the rains are good and the bushes are fruiting seeds. Little teeny beaks that are good for catching insects. Well, in drought times, those seeds are not plentiful, and these big beak birds, they just have troubles catching bugs with those big clunking beaks. So baby birds are being born with big beaks and little beaks all the time. But in years where there's a drought, not many seeds, these big ones don't have as good a time getting lunch, and a lot of them die. That's selection. It's survival of the fittest. And you see these kinds of pictures in many, many textbooks talking about this plant eater versus the insect eater. Now, this book, probably the most famous biology high school textbook written by Dr. Kenneth Miller, is the Texas adopted science book, biology book for Texas high schools. And it mentions about the research of Peter and Rosemary Grant and details some of their things and puts it in the textbook here. Now, one thing you do need to see about the discussions about the Grant's research, now I'm going to have to go fast, so I'll finish up here and conclude. We have time for question and answer. But look at what they said. The Grant's research clearly has limits, okay? Limitations research. For example, while the Grants observed changes in the sizes of finches' beaks, they did not observe the formation of a new species. Now, Darwin's book was entitled Species, so I mean, that won't be what evolution is about. Not only that, but the order of genera, the origin of phyla, the origin of classes, and the origin
Time.
of families. Okay, and that's good.
Okay, we'll be doing question and answer time now, and I'll come to all of you that have questions.
So Dr. Jackson, you defined evolution, biologists define it as changing allele frequencies. And I would agree that biologists, and I think I should identify myself. I'm also a faculty member in the biology department. I'm Matthew Quakox, herpetologist over in biology. So I would agree absolutely that biologists define evolution. Part of the definition is a change in allele frequencies. There's no question. I would not argue with that as well, at all. So the feeling I'm getting from your introduction is that evolution the definition of evolution has to entail some new form of DNA. That simply action on existing DNA is not enough to explain evolution as a definition. And I guess I'm a bit confused by that because I don't know a biologist that defines evolution that way. Biologists have no problem saying that selection can act on the genetic material that's there and result in changes that can result in different forms.
What did you mean by action on DNA? Those were the words. I did not say there was action on the DNA.
Okay.
It was like shuffling the cards in a deck of cards. No new cards are coming in. So no new DNA is coming in, is what I said.
So that's your definition.
Now, would this shift in allele frequencies, would that be equated to microevolution in your mind?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Microevolution is clearly and obvious. It's variation, isn't it?
So you're acknowledging that.
Well, would you say it's variation?
Microevolution is variation. No, I would say that variation has to be a component for microevolution.
Okay, sure. So variation happens whenever microevolution happens.
variation.
You said it had to be a component of microevolution, so I figured that variation must be happening when microevolution is happening.
Variation has to be a prerequisite for microevolution. You have to have genetic variation and some form of differential physics.
Okay. Now, as I mentioned so many times, and my main point is not that microvariation doesn't happen, that microevolution doesn't happen, that variation doesn't happen. My main point is these processes that are held up as an evolutionary process can't get you from bacteria to human beings. That would be what I'm actually saying. That I just can't swallow, biologically speaking. So no, you were saying that no evolutionist believes that natural selection can write new genetic information. Well then, we must wonder what the source is for new genetic information for bacteria to not have the sources of genetics for the central nervous system and for arms and legs. Is that not true?
I think Dr. Burt wants to interject.
Yeah, I think I can speak to some of this relevance about variation. Variation is absolutely required for natural selection to work because it's a filtering process. If you don't have anything to filter, you're going to filter anything, right? There's no variation. So I think we're all on board that there has to be variation. But where does variation come from? It comes from another very important evolutionary mechanism called mutation. That's where we get new genes. That's where we get new variation types, the alleles, the types of DNA. And yes, we get lots of new DNA. Did you know that in chordate evolution, one of the reasons it's speculated that one of the lines of evidence that we are so successful at being able to be adaptive is we have a fourfold increase in our DNA from the invertebrate ancestry that we come from. And that's because the genome duplicated itself twice. That gives you more DNA to play with, more variation on which natural selection can operate. And you even admit that there are mutations. You keep using the term mutation, and you claim that HIV is 1 million times higher mutation rate than humans, which I've never seen that figure before, but it is higher.
Well, then natural selection acts upon genes to actually write new genetic information?
No, absolutely not.
Okay, mutations act on genes to create new genetic information?
Mutations are errors introduced into DNA that creates new alleles.
That creates new alleles with new information that wasn't there before?
Absolutely.
Do you know of one?
Are you kidding? I mean, they're
I only asked for one. If it's that easy, this should be terrifically simple.
I actually gave you
Well, tell me what it was.
the gene duplication event in the chromosome 17, I believe, that I indicated that we share with chimps, bonobos, and humans. There's your one.
And how is that a gene duplication, the creation of a new gene? It's just an extra copy. Is it not?
We call it a gene duplication event, and subsequent to that can accumulate a mutation, which is a change that can give that a new function. And there is actually evidence of that. There is a gene, I believe the original copy was an I protein. The duplication event occurred, and then one copy of that accumulated mutation, and it's actually a milk protein to that. So yes, duplication creates the new DNA that subsequent mutations can create new variation that natural selection can operate on. And genetic textbooks are full of it.
The textbook, does the textbook prove something to me? I mean, somebody can write something in a textbook and say it's this way. But what does science prove how this came about?
Science, the way science works is scientists collect data, and we go through a process of peer evaluation.
Okay. Yeah, we'll let Dr. Jackson respond to this, and then we're going to move to another question.
Is the original gene that was duplicated a milk protein gene?
No.
And this is no.
Well, in organisms preceding it serves as
Preceding it in the evolution story.
Yes, in evidence of evolution, yes.
So, in evidence of evolution. Remember, evidence is not proof. I'll go to the next thing.
Can you say again what you just said?
Evidence is not proof. I have plenty of evidence for creation, but it isn't compelling to
Show me the evidence.
I'm so glad you asked. One of your examples. I have very strong evidence. Again, it's not proof. Very strong evidence. Maybe it's just coincidence. Very strong evidence that humans and chimps never had a common ancestry. It's the the chimpanzee simian 12-13 fusion in human chromosome 2. This fusion, it's not amazing that humans and chimps would have the same look in DNA. Our bodies are similar, our biochemistry is similar. Yeah, we share 98% the same. We share 75% with microscopic nematode worms too. So it's not surprising that we share a lot of DNA with monkeys, and even that the karyotypes look similar. What is surprising is that just so happened that after we split from the chimps, we had a 12-13 fusion. The fact of the matter is, no simian carries this fusion, but every living human does. That's not evidence we came from monkeys, it's evidence that we were never related.
This blows my mind. How is a pattern that's consistent with evolution proof that it didn't occur?
Oh, it occurred. It occurred. It seems very likely it occurred. However, it never occurred in any monkeys. Only humans carry it, and chimps, none of them do it. Every living human does. How does that show we're the same as them? It actually shows we're a different lineage.
How's that evidence for creation? Yeah, that's what creation.
Well, I just said that it isn't surprising that chimps will have very similar DNA to us. They were created with similar body plans, so their DNA would have to be very similar too. That is a necessary logical
So
step.
if you say that evidence isn't proof, then how
Sure,
can
I
you
just
try
said
to
it
give
wouldn't
us
prove it,
evidence
but I was asked for
your
evidence.
idea?
What?
If evidence isn't proof, then how can you try to give evidence for your ideas?
Oh, I'm allowed to give evidence as long as I never claim that it's
Maybe
proof.
it's not proving anything.
Can we finally, once and for all, prove anything in science? Can we, Dr. Burke?
Science is built upon gathering data and
Yes.
giving the best interpretation
Yes.
of it.
But
Yes.
how can you prove that it's wrong?
Yes.
You can say there's no evidence. There's no evidence
We're not
that
gonna
it's
prove
wrong,
it.
and there's no evidence that it's right. So you can't prove anything.
I didn't say I was proving anything.
Exactly.
I said you can't. With
Science says it's true.
That evidence
Guys, please calm down. Speak up.
prove that it's not true. Then you must have evidence. If evidence means that there's no proof, then you have nothing.
No, I didn't say evidence means there's no proof. I said
You
people
said-
get it
I
wrong.
said if
Evidence
evidence
is
is
data, and inferences can be made from evidence. But evidence is not the same thing as proof. Just evidence doesn't get something codified into a scientific law. It's going to be a lot of testable things, which then the scientific community condones as proof. And even then, we're not sure. Like spontaneous generation, we thought we had that proved, but we now know, of course, it's not correct at all.
Can you test it?
Oh man, I think we need our moderator to pick.
Yes, thank you. Okay. Okay, ask your question.
Oh, okay, Dr. Burke, right? I have a question. Just where, like, if we are from monkeys, right? So, okay, if we share we share a gene with monkeys, then.
No, we share a lot of genes.
Okay. All right. As much as my speaking is not extremely correct, let's just go with it. Okay. So, if we're from the same lineage as monkeys, so does that mean, like, I wanna know what that means, like how we, like, came about. Does that mean, like, one day a monkey popped out a human, or does that mean that?
This is very important. What you're actually describing is what is called anagenesis, like a single lineage can change through time. The different species of great apes have evolved through a process, and many other lineages that are now extinct evolved through a process of cladogenesis, which involves speciation. And speciation can happen in various ways. The main way we have evidence that speciation occurs is when a population of formerly interbreeding individuals become geographically separated. Okay. And as they become geographically separated, they experience different mutations, different selection pressures, and if they no longer have interconnection, they become different gene pools. And if enough time progresses and they accumulate enough mutations, well then we've formed new species.
Is that like ring speciation in warblers on the Tibetan Plateau?
No, that's a different type.
That's
another
geographical
pattern.
separation, isn't it?
But it's also getting reconnection at the end, yeah.
And the reconnection shows infertility in crosses, right?
Sure, and that's what I mean. If there's enough time period where the gene pools are distinct, then there may be, for a variety of reasons,
So
there
the
could be
loss-
pre-zygotic isolating mechanisms, post-zygotic isolating mechanisms.
The loss of the ability to reproduce would be an indication of true evolution.
Well, it's one definition of forming species, yes.
So where's the link?
The link between one.
The link between monkeys and humans? Like, have we found it?
Actually, yeah, the human fossil record is really quite good. As some of you may have seen a recent Futurama. How many amazing, and because the names that they give those really are missing link fossils or
Are we
transition.
talking about like the people we find in ice and stuff like that?
No. Most of the fossils are found in Africa because there's strong evidence that human origins comes from Africa. And so we have many of these transitional fossils. But again, they're not in a direct line. And that's one of the things that Futurama got wrong. You know, kind of like this poster of man kind of in a line. That's not how it works. They're offshoots. But from those offshoots, we can use the principle of parsimony to reconstruct the likely situation of the common ancestor in those groups.
But we've never found the common ancestor.
No, we found all of these transitional fossils which are in the tree. In how can I, if I could draw this? But like, consider them like, instead of a straight line, they're
Yeah,
little bitty,
I
they're
understand.
little bitty side branches going
So-
up to that point.
So, do we know where we started branching off at? Is that where we say that we branched off from a bacteria?
No, that's way back. But yeah, it's in the same tree, but now you're down way at the trunk of the tree.
So-
but it's the same principle, actually.
What is the name of the common ancestor? Yes, name the species.
In phylogenetics, we don't give it a name. We call it the node.
So it's imaginary. Okay, show me the fossil. What fossil are you speaking of as the node where we branched off? Is it Sahelanthropus chinensis?
You didn't listen to what I said. I'm
I
saying
asked a straight question. What's the name of the fossil? Is there a common ancestor or not? And if so, is it imaginary or does it have a name? Have we found the bones?
because the fossils we have found have not been in the line of anagenesis. In cladogenesis, when you find a fossil, by definition, it is a sister taxon. It is not the node.
So we don't have any direct line ancestors leading back to the split between us and monkeys. Is that what you're saying? No. Are you talking about Lucy? Are you talking about Jemai? Are you talking about
All of those
Iceberg
are side branches.
So is there anything but side branches, or is there anything on the trunk leading to us?
Okay, are you your mother or your father?
Okay, now look, I'm asking
Which
for
one,
the
which one are you? If you're not either, then you don't exist.
I don't exist because I am not my mother.
Well, you just said if I can't identify them.
Well, you said that there were many, and that they were evidences for evolution, but I don't see any. Show me the fossil.
They're all transitional fossils that are side
Transitions from what to what?
from different lineages of hominids.
Hominids. Okay, where do you find hominids? And is that the first thing that comes off the monkey branch to us? Will you call that a hominid, or is that later?
Can I say something?
I'm not getting the name of a fossil, and there's so many that are in the literature.
Just in your presentation, to me it was a misrepresentation of evolution. You said, so you're saying you get worms to eagles.
Is that
I
not
know,
true?
but that's what you said in your presentation. I
Well,
don't
it
know
is true in
biologists.
evolution.
I'll finish in a minute.
Okay.
I don't know any biologist who claims that we came from worms and then the next day they were eagles.
Okay.
And you say, so where's the missing
Next day,
link?
Dr. Storch, did we evolve from velvet worms?
But you're saying, where's the missing link? Like, there's
We
this
didn't
one
come from
line.
worms.
We did not.
Yes. Can we please, hey guys, hold on a second. I know we're very passionate about everything, okay? Can we please listen to each other, allow each other to finish our conversations? Your question was, did you understand his question? How did, that you misrepresented? Am I correct? Is that what you're?
Arguing about evolution, like there's one missing, like where's the one missing link? There's evidence leading up to it, and that's evolution. It's not, well, where's the man that fell, or the monkey that fell on a man? It's not, you don't understand, that's basic evolution to me, that's basic biology.
Okay, you did say I misrepresented evolution by saying that worms evolved into eagles. Now, in that tree, in the phylogenetic tree, do not worms eventually end up as eagles? Okay, now I want you to look it up yourselves. The theory says bacteria gave rise to all forms of life. True? Archaeobacters?
Archaeobacters share a common ancestor
With what? The original Archaeobacter?
with eukaryotic lineage.
Okay, now, what exactly is this tree then? Isn't it
There is
bacteria?
there is no living species that has
Was there a time when bacteria ruled the earth?
Yes, there was.
Okay, there was nothing but bacteria.
When the common ancestors of today's bacteria
Okay,
and eukaryotic.
there was nothing but bacteria on the earth. Somehow those bacteria changed into every order and phylum of living things today, true?
The common ancestor of today's living bacteria, yes, and
Okay.
gave rise to also eukaryotes that also split and gave rise to other lineages.
Can eagles trace their ancestry back to those bacteria when only bacteria lived on this planet? Can eagles trace their lineage back to bacteria when bacteria were the only thing living on this planet?
Yes, as
Yes, okay. Eagles came from bacteria then. Is that not, I mean, that's the theory. I'm not trying to make fun of it. I'm trying to define it and asking, what does it say? My understanding was that bacteria turned into worms, and the worms turned into fish, and the Tiktaalik turned into eagles.
I want to follow up on what Keith just said about
Good.
misleading people. How long did the Grants do their research?
20 years.
20 years. And they didn't observe the formation of new species in 20 years?
And yet
That's
some
incredible.
of the weeks increased by a dozen times.
You won't find a biologist in the entire world that will tell you that new species should be found in 20
That's
years.
right. How could this process of mutation and natural selection accomplish something in 20 years? But yet it's in the chapter on evidence for
But they
evolution.
found all kinds of minute changes in 20 years, right?
Yes, the
and over a
micro
million
variations.
years, those minute changes could actually form a new species, right?
Only if they actually have the ability to add up and cross those lines and generate new genetic material, yes. But only if they can do that, and natural selection can only pick. We need the moderator again.
All right, speak your question.
I have a question for Dr. Jackson. I was wondering how you would define sickle cell in African natives, how we don't have it in European nations or Native Americans. It's really only for African natives. That had to be a mutation since we do not have the genetic material to create that now. That had to be a mutation which created new genetic material in order for them to have sickle cells to be immune to malaria.
Now, don't forget that the gene controlling the development of red blood cells that is involved in making them the toroidal shape instead of the sickle shape has been inactivated by the mutation. The gene has been deactivated. It's the shutting down of an old gene that once controlled and helped control the shape of red blood cells. It isn't new genetic information. The mutation is a DNA copying error, and now the gene has dropped out of the genome and doesn't work anymore. In Africa, and the only reason that the people who had this were able to
I'll answer the
survive
question, please.
was because the sickle shape, which can kill you, does confer difficulty for the malaria parasite to infect and cause the malaria.
Well, the sickle cell is only activated when the malaria is in there and in the bloodstream. And
Wait a minute, are you telling me that people only suffer sickle cell symptoms when they have malaria?
They're homogenous for the sickle cell, then they have sickle cell anemia. But whenever they're heterozygous, when they have one gene, one allele, I'm sorry, that has sickle cell and the other one which does not, then they will develop the sickle cell shape in their bloodstream after they contract malaria, and then the malaria cannot infect their red blood cells.
So you're saying that people only have sickle cell in their red bloodstream if they have malaria? Now, I don't believe that that is actually in the
No,
literature.
there's a certain chemical
Yeah.
that activates that shape, that changes the shape of the red blood cell. They're not born with sickle cells.
But then why do people of African descent living in this country who've never come in contact with malaria have terrible health problems because of sickle cell
Because
anemia?
they're homogeneous for that sickle cell. You get two people who, all right, we have the.
So you're saying only in the homozygous state can people have this problem?
No, yes, in the
Yes.
homozygous state, that's when you get sickle cell anemia, because that's when all your red blood cells become sickle shaped. But whenever you're heterozygous for it, then not all of your red blood cells become sickle
Yeah.
shaped, and it's only activated with malaria.
I can see where it'd be activated over generations by selection, but in individuals, as far as I know, individuals don't have a trigger by the presence of the malaria parasite where their blood cells start going sickle. They weren't able to make them very well anyway, even if they're heterozygous. Look it up. Yeah. Dr. Burt might be able to comment on it further too.
At the beginning of your speech, you talked about viruses and how they have a high detection rate. But you made a final comment kind of want to think about is you said that the viruses are still here. They haven't evolved. When you said that, you gave me the impression that you're saying that viruses are not a supreme, more upper-level being or organism on the planet.
I do not consider viruses to be the leading species on the planet.
What about Ebola Zika in Africa? Ebola Zika has an 80% kill rate to humanity.
Are you suggesting it is a superior species to humans in some way? That is a qualitative statement.
I apologize, could you repeat that?
Are you saying that Ebola is a superior species to humans? That is a qualitative statement.
No, I'm not saying they're superior species. I feel like you're making an expression that
Of value.
we are better than
Better.
we are supreme over viruses. And
that
that
is-
statement with evolution, there's not really, from what I learned, I believe that there's not necessarily a being that is the top being in the whole.
I think that
That's
Dr.
right.
Bird could agree that making a qualitative statement about which species is the most important, unless you're talking about, keystone species in clays having more value. I mean, it's not a scientific question which species is better. Is that not right, Dr. Bird? And so I really never commented on that, and I mean, personally, I do like people better than viruses. That is my opinion completely. I can't prove that it's better.
I'm not saying that I don't like people and I think
No, I'm not saying you said that, but
take home with me. No,
it's
that's
not a
not what I'm
scientific
saying.
activity to qualify different species as being better than others, any more than different breeding groups of humans being better than others.
Dr. Burt, they're related. I mean, I agree with you completely.
Yeah. I thought you would on that, yeah.
But it is interesting to think about, what is the time scale that evolution works with? It's generations. Viruses, bacteria, organisms with fast generation time basically experience more evolution than we do. So what that means is that they can actually, they have more rounds of acquiring mutations that give them the genetic variation, where they can actually adapt faster to changing environments. And so, I mean, if you think about it in that way, I guess organisms, like viruses will be able to adapt faster than something like an elephant.
Okay, we got a question over here.
Dr. Jackson, I was just wondering how you would describe the writing and rewriting of DNA.
Transcription and translation is the central dogma of biology. The writing and rewriting of DNA is conducted by a large host of enzymes. And editing enzymes, repair enzymes, and severing enzymes, and the enzymes that unzip the DNA strand and allow the RNA templates to be made from it. This is in every Bio 101 textbook, but I'm not sure what you're actually getting at.
Well, if you're suggesting that the only way that evolution can occur is that there's new information, then that's not really, like, the writing of DNA isn't new information because all DNA is made up of the same information. So,
For
the
instance,
same
DNA does
kinds.
not have the same information as an earthworm.
but all DNA is made up of the same proteins.
The same nucleotides, the same nitrogenous bases, yes. But they are like the dots and dashes in Morse code. It's the order of those nucleotides that makes the difference.
So if the order is rearranged, then different things can arise.
Different things can, but if you rearrange the order of a very complex system, there's a very high chance that you will cause the system to crash. It's not hard to it's not easy to crash an abacus, but it is easy to crash Windows 7 if you change some of the command.
But it is possible to, if you know what you're doing, change the entire computer system.
Yes, but you now act as God in the situation. See, if nature does it, it's an accident. It's a random mutation. It's just a nucleotide substitution that happened because it was a copying mistake. Right?
If you assume that nature is the only force.
Yes, now maybe the Force or Thor or, Karma is doing it, if you like. My name is Earl. There might be a force out there. Now, it's true, I do believe in God, and maybe God is actually conducting the events of evolution. It certainly would take miraculous power for this to happen, because it doesn't seem to happen in nature, naturally.
Okay, let's move on to another question.
Okay, well, I don't like science personally. So I just wanted to know if everybody's going based off evolution and what's proven or evident on how you got here, how do you have faith in God? If you're looking at what's proven or what's evident, how do I learn to have faith in something that I can't see if I have to be told that this, I don't like science, but you know what you said and what you said.
I don't know if we can handle faith issues. That's not really what this is about. I would prefer us to stick to scientific questions. If you have a faith issue, let's ask Dr. Jackson. Obviously, he's a man of faith, or ask me, or ask Pastor Chuck. But I understand. I totally understand. But that's not what this is about. This is about science. And so if you have no, it's great. I think a lot of people agree with you. Sure, go ahead. Really fast, though, please.
Why do you not science? Do you find it threatening? Because what I'm trying to communicate is it doesn't need it. It doesn't need it.
I don't find science threatening, but
Okay, good.
you know how Christianity has to play believing and Islamists have to play believing.
Absolutely.
If I see it this way, I don't want what you have to say or what anybody else has to say to interfere with it.
But no, that's what I'm saying. That's what I mean by threatening. I'm not saying anything about your creator.
All right, we have another question over here.
This one's for Dr. Jackson. How old is the Earth, our solar system, and the universe? Are they all the same age, or what?
Long story, but yes. If you actually look at how space deployed, and not how the planets and galaxies deployed into space, but how space itself had to be deployed, space would have been stretched. If you stretch the fabric of space, Einstein says you've also stretched the fabric of time. Look up the Pioneer anomaly on Google, and you'll see a perfect example of evidence that is how the universe deployed, by stretching. In that case, Andromeda is 2 million light years away, but it also is 2 million light stretched years away from us. Yes, I believe the Earth is 6,000 years old, and that would be another presentation to show you why that is not devoid of logic also.
We have another question for Dr. Burke.
Yes, Dr. Burke, how would you explain how random mutations and something that apparently has no system and just has random triggers, how does that cause the order that we see?
Okay, yeah. So mutations absolutely are random. And some of the mutations cause, many of the mutations are detrimental. And what natural selection does is the filtering process weeds those out. Actually, a lot of mutations are neutral because the way the genetic code is set up, the third position of codons basically oftentimes codes for the same amino acid. So those technically are mutations, but they don't have any effect. But mutations do occur that cause changes in alleles that may produce a better function for the trait that's associated with that protein. And that's just one part of that. So you're right, the mutation is absolutely random. But see, if you get a good mutation, that's when the filtering process, that's when natural selection increases the frequency of that allele in the future, because the bearer of that, let's say that it's an allele that gives better predator avoidance, okay? That individual is going to survive longer, reproduce more, so that mutation is going to increase in frequency, right? Okay. And the alleles that are not as good as that, in a comparative sense, predators are going to take them, pick those individuals off, so they're going to be filtered out of the process. So you're right, mutations are random, but natural selection is the non-random force.
But how do you explain these random mutations that happen in each individual species all meshing together in an ecosystem or a biosphere?
I don't know what you mean. I mean, mutations work through individuals to produce phenotypes, and that's the only thing that they can affect. So they can change the individual that they're in. Now that individual interacts with other individuals in their ecosystem, but that's as far as your analogy goes.
Dr. Jackson, did you have a response to that?
Only the question of, is there a known mutation that actually did confer superior predator avoidance in a prey? I realize it was thrown out as a hypothetical, but I wanted it to be understood as a hypothetical if that indeed is what it was.
Okay, well, let me go to one that we do know. There's, like we talked about HIV,
So no.
and it's, okay, never mind.
Okay.
You know, we're about out of time, and I'm tired of talking to irrational people. So.
Wow.
You are rational. Thank you. You said I'm not qualified to judge those sort of things. Think about that.
Misunderstanding of basic evolutionary principles.
I have a misunderstanding of evolutionary principles because I say that worms evolved into eagles.
And because you use the term genetic drift inappropriately, and it's one of the basic fundamental evolutionary mechanisms. I'm sorry, I mean, you need to just go back to fundamentals and
Like
figure
which
out what
one?
we're talking about.
Please, specific, please.
Genetic drift.
Genetic drift. So genetic drift is capable of creating new genetic information.
Absolutely not. Obviously, you don't know what genetic drift is.
Because I don't think it can.
You tell me what genetic drift is.
Genetic drift, random, sexual recombination.
No,
as it goes through there. Okay, look. No.
Okay, what is genetic drift?
Is genetic drift capable of producing new genetic information? No. That means genetic drift is not capable of
What is
creating an
genetic drift?
onward
Don't tell me what it can't do. Tell me what it is.
Well, I'm saying it can't do evolution.
Yeah, of course it can't do evolution if you don't know what it is.
So tell us what it is.
Okay, I'm irrational
Dr. Burt.
according to you, and you're rational according to me. All
I
right.
don't know what it is.
The textbook definition of genetic drift. Sure. Okay, now let me understand what you're doing here. Textbook definition for genetic drift, then evolution must be true.
Hey, my students can tell you I'm pretty good about grading on a curve. So.
So Dr. Burke, could you tell us what genetic drift is?
You know what? I'm not going to give you more ammunition to. If he wants
Well, I'm just saying, if he does, do you know what it is? Can anyone? This is between Dr. Burt and Dr. Jackson. Dr. Burt, can you give us the definition of genetic drift?
Genetic drift is basically the biological version of sampling error. In small populations, there can be random changes in allele frequencies from generation to generation because of sampling error. That's the simplest.
How does that happen?
If population, so for example, a founder effect. If there's a new population established from, basically, the Dutch, I think, were the ones that established South Africa.
Yes.
Yes. And it was obviously they're not representative of the true genetic diversity of Holland. And so the few founding members that established that population in South Africa, they had a different frequency of certain genetic illnesses. I can't remember exactly which one it is, but that's an example of a change in that allele frequency. And that's genetic.
And that change happened from sexual interaction with one another?
No, the change actually occurred as soon as they got there.
How did the change occur? Just from them being in the environment? Just from them being in the environment?
Yeah, just
So in a matter of 70 years, that much change happened because those people would have had to reproduce with one another. No? I just want to wonder if I'm understanding.
No, as soon as they stepped off the boat and established a new population, and their allele frequencies were different from the population that they established, that's genetic.
So moving from Texas to New York is genetic drift? I mean, am I understanding that? Okay.
If you consider the New York population is being different.
So my DNA changes when I go to New York? Okay. Shh, I just want to understand. I don't understand.
You would have an itsy-bitsy tiny impact in changing the allele frequency, right? But now, see, that would be a very minor genetic drift effect, because what I said is that due to sampling here, that means small population. I mean, and New York is not small population.
Right.
So, I mean, let's say that 10 individuals from New York establish, move into, 100 people moved to Mount Enterprise, small population. That actually could change some allele frequencies. That's all genetic drift is.
How?
Dr. Jackson, do you?
Well, because if they have different alleles, then they're adding to that. And it's also in this case.
But how does it add? Like I'm from Dallas, and there's someone from Houston. If you put me and someone from Houston next to each other.
If you have different alleles, then
So
you
just
consider.
me sitting next to someone is going to be like, okay, our alleles need to change because we're
No, they're not changing.
So you're just moving that person.
Yes.
And that's what.
And they have different alleles, right? And if
So
they're represented.
like moving sparrows from here to, or from England to here. Like
Yeah, that was actually countereffective. Absolutely.
Okay, so the sparrows from there that came here changed because they came here.
No, they didn't
Okay.
change. No.
Dr. Jackson, do you have a response to any of this, or should we ask another question? Do you guys want to ask another question? Keep on this. Oh, she had a question. Go ahead.
Okay, first of all, I have a disclaimer. This is really just a question. 'Cause I'm not debating anything. Everybody else, I knew this would get heated, and that's not what I'm asking. I really wanted to know. How you were saying that, I'm still kind of on the monkey thing, like how you were saying that humans came from, the monkey lineage. I was just wondering, how come there's both humans and monkeys if we both came from that
Okay,
area?
that's a good question, because that's a common misconception. We didn't come from monkeys that live today. We share a common ancestor. Okay? Just like you didn't come from your sister. No, I mean seriously, that's because we call those sister species. So it's basically the same thing.
Dr. Jackson, did you want to respond to that?
Well, again, we come from a common ancestor with current monkeys and great apes. It is what the theory says, but again, what is that common ancestor and hasn't been found, or is that link still missing? That's basically the only comment, but we discussed that already.
Okay, another question. All right.
I don't like mice. Talk really loud. Dr. Bird.
Yes.
Do you agree that the basic formula for life is oxygen plus sugar, which ATP equals water and carbon dioxide? Is that the basic formula for life?
No, I wouldn't say so.
Not because other textbooks say that. I was trying to figure out how there are bacteria deep in the ocean that can digest sulfur. And how does that work?
I can't really answer a question that's
I was just saying about respiration, what you just said.
Speak speak up, please?
That was just cellular respiration, what you just read.
Cellular respiration?
Yeah, that's just a mechanism associated with how we get ATP, but I mean, I wouldn't say that that's life.
The building blocks of all that.
Josh, ask your question.
Okay. What I'm learning in my class is that the Big Bang happened, and when it happened, there were rocks that flung out at a certain speed, and one of those rocks was Earth. But it was molten, and then it hardened over time to a rock, and it rained on this rock, and from this rain on this rock formed DNA, or single-cell organisms, something of the sort. And from that, all life was formed over 4.6 billion years. So if that's the case, and this is clearly what I'm learning in class, if that is the case, then yes, eagles came from worms, and we came from monkeys, because all life came from this single-cell organism that, when rain on rock, was formed. Right?
Life is not athletic.
And so then what Dr. Jackson says is totally true, that we definitely came from monkeys, according to evolution, and eagles definitely came from worms.
No, absolutely not. Now, that's where you're wrong.
Okay, but let me finish here. However, sharing common ancestry. Otherwise,
But that's no, that's very different. Sharing a common ancestry means you share. Oh,
I mean, I get your.
This is the common ancestor. Eagles came from this common ancestor. Worms came from this common ancestor. Worms did not turn into eagles.
Dr. Jackson, would you like to rebut that?
Okay, eagles. There was a time in the evolution theory where Earth was ruled by bacteria. Nothing but bacterial life existed. Somehow, you got to get from point A to point B. Now, there was a time when only soft-bodied creatures were around, when the first eukaryotes then got to the first multicellular life, and that would include worms. There was a time, was there not a time in the evolutionary story of life when the Earth had nothing more complex than segmented worms?
Actually, by the time there were segmented worms, that's after the Cambrian explosion. There's a lot of others.
Were there eagles at that time?
No, absolutely not.
There were not eagles at that time.
No.
Okay, did the lineage go through the ancient worms, not current today earthworms, but ancient worms? Did the lineage go from ancient worms to the Tiktaalik Rosea?
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not. So what was the ancestor of the Tiktaalik? What was the ancestor of Acanthostega? Was it a worm? Was it an invertebrate?
It shares a common ancestor.
But is the ancestor a worm-like creature? If you saw it today, would you say, look, a worm?
Look, it depends on what part of the tree.
How about this part?
You know what? If I had a tree that looked like that, I would fire my.
All right. Worms did evolve from the bacteria. They have a common ancestor with the bacteria, right?
I'll grant you that bacteria were some of the earliest life forms.
Okay. But somehow you have got to get from bacteria, from the simple to the more complex organisms, and you're saying worms are not in the lineage of eagles, but bacteria are. Okay, well now at least we got that. And all aside from saying it's more complicated than that, it's more complicated than that, it's more complicated than that, we do go from bacteria to eagles, which I think is a bigger jump than from worms.
Dr. Jackson.
Can I also
Can you define what a worm is, please? I mean, there are several phyla, therefore animals. What is a worm? There are flatworms, there are round worms,
there are penis worms.
Worm is nothing more than an animal that has long cylindrical. So what is a worm exactly?
I think the better question is to say define truth.
Okay, you know what? It has been very heated. Let me say one thing before you leave. Yeah. Guys, we didn't know what this was going to be like. We said, hey, let's get both sides of the argument. You hear so much. You know, I think sometimes what the deal is we're trained to think a certain way with certain parameters, and we don't ever think outside of the box, it seems sometimes. And I think both of these gentlemen have given us enough information, at least as students, to think outside of the box, to think differently maybe perhaps than what we're all, I mean, isn't that what science is? It's challenging, guys, can I speak? It's challenging the status quo, and that's what we want you to do. I know we've got a lot of questions. I would like to formally say, Dr. Burt, we really appreciate you coming out and being here. You're excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Dr. Jackson, we appreciate you as well. Thank you for coming out.